Welcome back to Not So Grand Garage. Tonight's the night we tear into the little red Samurai sitting here in the shop. All its parts have finally showed up, so we need to tear into it. It's a customer of mine's, a 1990 Suzuki Samurai, and it's pretty solid. Body's solid on it, frame's solid on it, but it's got a lot of wear front to back pretty well. So we're going to be going through a lot of things on it over the next few weeks, I'd say. But first up, we're going to tear this rear end apart. We're going to put in new wheel bearings, new axle seals, new brakes. So let's get at it. So we got the tire and wheel off on the driver's side rear. Went on and pulled these 4 nuts and lock washers. Now the drum should be ready to come off. Went on and gave it a few taps around the outside. And now it is free and ready to come off. You can see the wheel studs stay with the drum, which this thing is absolutely soaked in gear oil. Take you in a little closer here. The brake shoes and everything are soaked in oil, so we'll be replacing all of that, which this stuff looks relatively new, so that's kind of disappointing, but it is what it is. So we'll go on and get the brake shoes and everything pulled out of the way, and we'll get the slide hammer out and pull this axle shaft out. Now, something I always like to do on drum brake setups, especially if you do not have a shop manual or anything like that, just do one side at a time, or take pictures of everything. That way you know where all your hardware, all your springs go, and how everything sits back in place. So when you take it apart, you're not left with a giant pile of parts and no idea how it goes back together. So just pay attention to how your springs come off and how all your hardware comes off. Drum brakes are really simple, so there's nothing really to be afraid of. You've got your little clips here, one on each side, that holds the shoes to the backing plate. You've got a spring here and a spring down here, which pulls the shoes together. You got your wheel cylinder right here, which pushes them apart against the drum when you push on the brake pedal. And this rod assembly right down here is for the parking brake setup. Trying out a new headlamp I was sent. I've had them out in the shop and out in the fuel shed for about a week now, and so far I'm really impressed with them. So if they hold up, I'll let you guys in on them. So we got the brake shoes and brake hardware off and out of the way. Got them laid out down here. Pretty straightforward. As you can see, there's a puddle of gear oil down on the bottom. Now I need to disconnect the brake line from the back of the wheel cylinder, get this here out of the way, and remove the 4 nuts that correspond to these bolts on the back side here to pull the backing plate, and we'll get our axle shaft pulled. So we got our backing plate bolts and nuts out of the way. So now we are ready to get the slide hammer on this axle shaft. Now I'm going to try and use the 2-jaw puller setup for this. I'm going to clamp onto both sides of the flange there and see if I can drive it out. And there we have it. So I'm gonna go on and pull this out, and let me turn this light off so I'm not blinding you. I'm going to go on and pull this axle shaft out and take a look at the bearings and see what it's going to take to get the bearings off the shaft. I believe I'll have to cut the collar and cut the bearing off, which isn't a big deal. But yeah, we'll throw it up in the vise, take a look at it. Got the axle shaft here thrown up in the vise. And as you can see, the bearing's got a little bit of wiggle to it. It's not terrible, but by the time you add a tire and everything else to that, you're going to get quite a bit of movement at the edge of the tire. So yeah, we're going to get these bearings off, or this bearing off. Probably, from the looks of it, I'm going to have to cut this collar, cut the bearing, split them with a chisel, and knock them off. And then we'll be able to press our new bearings on using our 20-ton press. As you can see what I'm doing here, a steep angle all the way across that, so I'm not having to cut through both the bearing and the collar at the same time. But be careful not to go through the collar all the way. You don't want to get into the axle shaft. So just take your time with this, and then once you get it close, come back with a chisel and split it apart. Just a couple smacks with a chisel, split that collar all the way around. So we didn't go too far. We didn't hit the axle shaft or anything like that. So just a smack with a cold chisel, split that collar. Now all we gotta do is, you can already tell it's moved a little bit. So we got some wiggle room here. But I'm gonna work that cold chisel in back here, or in from this angle right here, and just work this collar off. Then we're gonna do the same thing with the bearing. We're gonna cut it apart, cut it off in pieces. Then we can get this backing plate off, get it cleaned up, and get it ready for our new bearing and new retaining collar. The bearing is most of the way apart now. All that's left is the inner race, and this is where it gets a little tricky, because right here is the axle shaft where the bearing seat is. So when you start cutting through this, be careful not to get into this axle shaft, because it's close there. So try and stay away from it as best you can. And there you have it. No damage to the axle shaft. Got the bearing off. Got the retainer off. So all this will just slide off the axle shaft and I'll pull it out of the vise. So we'll clean up our backing plate and go on and put it back on and get this all ready to press on the new bearing and the new collar. And yeah, we'll go back together with it. We got everything cleaned up a little bit, and we got the axle shaft set in here with the backing plate already on it. And we've got our new SKF bearings. So what I believe I'm going to do is I'm going to use the old collar to press the new bearing on. So yeah, we're not pushing against the outer race or anything like that on the bearing. And then we'll pop this off and press the collar on. And we should be good to go. You could probably get away with pressing both on at the same time, but it's not going to take any extra time to do it this way. So I'm just going to take my time and do it that way. Do them separately. And that way we know everything goes together as it should. So let's see if this works. So just a little note here. The SKF bearing is actually a Koyo bearing, which these are good bearings, so I'm not complaining at all. But yeah, just an interesting little side note. We've got everything lined up, so we're gonna take our time and see how this goes. And there we have it. Bearing is seated in place. So now I'm going to release pressure and pull that old collar off, press the new collar on. And there we have it. New collar and bearing are pressed on the axle shaft. And this is pretty well ready to go back in the axle housing. So all that is left is to come back over here And we need to get this old seal pulled out of this housing and get the new one pressed in, and she'll be ready to go back together. There's a bad seal. So we're gonna clean up this axle housing inside, make sure we don't have any gouges or anything like that, and if we do, I'll sand them a little bit and make sure they're not gonna tear up the new seal. The new seal, I'll run a little bead of black RTV around the outside edge, then drive it in, and our axle will be ready to go back in place. So we got our new axle seal driven in place, and axle shaft's ready to go back in. Now I don't know that it's necessary, but there was a bead of RTV around this flange when I pulled this apart, so I'm going to go on and apply a thin layer right back in its place where it was before sliding the axle shaft in. Now, when you're bolting your backing plate back up, make sure to have the wheel cylinder hole and the emergency brake or parking brake hole in the right locations before you do that. I'd also suggest cleaning up your hardware and applying a little bit of blue Loctite to the threads before you put it all back together. Well, it looks like I'm at a stopping point for the night. I got 2 of the bolts in and got them ran down tight. So that RTV should set up fine on the back side of the backing plate. But I went to grab the last 2 bolts that hold the backing plate on and found that when I cleaned them off, there's no threads left. So gonna have to pick up a couple bolts, and I'm out of brake cleaner, so I need to pick up a can of brake cleaner and some black paint and finish cleaning these backing plates up before I put the brakes together. But with that said, we are now noise-free, spin smooth, and no rocking back and forth, no movement at all that shouldn't be there. So we should be good to go. I'm gonna cut this off here for now, and we'll pick back up tomorrow and finish buttoning up the brakes on this side. I won't bore you with doing the other side because it's the same process, but yeah. We'll get the brakes buttoned up and call this part 1 of this project. Well, we're back out in the shop tonight, and we've got our brakes put back together. One thing to note is the hardware kit was a little different than the original, which this big spring here is different. But I went through, got online, looked around, and every hardware kit I could find is just like the new one. So I'm assuming they've made some changes, or the wrong spring was in this before. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's all back together. Backing plates bolted back in, new bolts, and the drum is right here. So we need to press our wheel studs out of the old drum, get them put in the new drum, and we'll go on and put a little paint on the drum so it doesn't rust up, and get this buttoned up. We're just about done. Well, we've got our drum put back on, all our hardware tight, and everything spins as it should. So all that's left is to get the tire back on, and I've got some brake lines to make, but I'm not going to bore you guys with that. So I got to do the other side yet, but that's going to wrap up the wheel bearing and brake job on the back side of this 1990 Suzuki Samurai. So yeah, we're going to wrap it up. This is going to be part one of this. There's quite a few things we've got coming up with this. I got to go through the front next. Like I said, I got to make new brake lines. I'm going to be replacing the lift kit that's on it and going with something completely different because the owner doesn't like how it's set up now. I'm going to be running a different set of tires and wheels on it. Going to have to rebuild the drive lines and a few other things. So the list is pretty long, but that's okay. We'll get it done. So with that said, if you got any comments, questions, complaints, drop them in the comment section below. If you want to support the channel, the PayPal link is in the description of the video. We've got SuperThanks enabled too, so you can go that route if you want. Feel free to. Yeah. If you haven't already, please subscribe. We appreciate you watching.